it to hell. Rubber and ivory children fell. Britain snatched Nile, France took the West. Germany grabbed land like it passed the test. No language in common, just rule and divide. Fed us their flags, made us swallow our pride. They taught us to hate what we saw in the mirror. Now we pray to their gods just to feel clearer. Hey, we weren't even there. Split the bloodline. Names not our own. Borders like chains. Still today, we carry the pain. Who gave them the right? Responsive body. Who let them rewrite? Not our bodies cold. Who drew the line? Through our souls. Colonial goals. What they stole, we'll reclaim whole. We are the story they try to control. But memory's a drum and truth don't sleep. Our roots run deep where their cuts ran steep. Now we rise with fire in our name, burning their maps, reclaiming our flame. Burning their maps, reclaiming our flame. You carved us up. We rise again. One Africa. Yeah.
Greetings. Welcome to another Alkebulan Awakening series in collaboration with Kumbukeni. Just bear with us. Yes, we're trying to get our guest on. I think she got kicked out, but yeah, bear with me for a minute. Let me see if I can get her back. Before we do the introductions, just bear with us.
Habari gani wana Ubuntu.
Hello, everybody. Just bear with us. We're trying to get our guest back. She was on here, then she got kicked out. So yeah, oh, she's back now. There we go. There we go. We got her. Hello, Amne. Can you hear us? Hello, Amne. Can you hear us?
She's frozen.
Hello.
We may need to do no video because of the connection.
Okay. All right.
Let's see
Just
what
bear with me.
happens. But while we are here sitting, everyone, tell us what's going on with you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Africa.
Not Africa.
Yeah.
And the development of Africa. Not Africa, but here the development of Africa.
But how timely, you know? It's good that we had this. It fits with the conversation, you know?
Absolutely. Okay, let's just do the introductions. Guys, apologies for that. My name, as always, is Olajide Dosunmu. I'm the founder of the Emerging Alkebulan. And as you've all be accustomed to what we do on this platform, we're about decolonizing the minds and finding Afrocentric solutions. Getting away from the Yoruba and the Mozungu, because for so long, you all know that everything they've done is to underdevelop us and not to give us the capacity to build ourselves up. So it's about time we take control. Welcome, everybody. Unduko.
Habari gani, how are you? Karibuni, welcome, asanteni kwa kuwa nasi. Thank you for being with us. The name is Nduku, I'm the host on Kumbukeni. We have to be vigilant. We have to start preparing. like I put out the video, we have to prepare small where we are. Start with what you can do, because we can't keep sitting around while we are getting destroyed. So yeah, I look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. As you can all see there, we got our guest, Amne Suedi. I'm just going to let her introduce herself. Once you've done that, Amne, and then we'll go to the conversation. If you want to introduce yourself to our audience, please. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, my sister.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. So yes, my name is Amne Suedi. I'm an international lawyer, specialized in investments, treaty contract negotiations, and really focusing on natural resources. So I have a practice in Switzerland as well as in Tanzania, covering mainly negotiations within the Eastern and Southern African countries, whether representing multinational companies or governments. So that's what I do in a nutshell, and really pleased to be here.
Perfect. The CV is actually brilliant selling. So because basically you can actually give us in terms of what we're looking for. Because like I said to you, we're looking for somebody who can actually, who is part of deals. You know, how does Africa have control the negotiation table? Okay, let's go to the topic. I'll put the topic up. The topic today is, how can Africa negotiate equity deals in systems built for hegemonic powers? You know, because we know for so long that the deals that we sign are basically not equitable. So if you want to go into the topic for us, please. Oops.
Is she frozen again? Yeah, we might need to do audio.
Yeah.
When Sis comes back, let's just do audio.
Yeah, just bear with us, guys. Bear with us.
Yeah, but while we're here, like, because we can continue conversation while we're here, to everyone who's on, what are your thoughts on the topic? How can Africa negotiate deals on equity when the systems are built to favor the hegemonic powers? What are your thoughts? And then, like I asked before, what's going on with everyone? How is everyone doing? And Oladile and I must say thank you all for supporting us, for continuing to the Kumbukeni supporters who've been there since 2023 when we started. Thank you so much for being with us, for giving grace, for defending us when we are attacked, right? So we appreciate your support. And then for the new people, for those who are just finding out about us, please subscribe, like, share. And even for those who've been with us for a long time, share these videos. These videos are meant to help us decolonize our minds and prepare so that we can organize and take down this system that is exploiting us. That's the goal. We're not just here talking or seeking subscribership.
Yeah, like Unduku said, the main reason why we're basically here is basically to decolonize our thought process. For so long, a lot of us operate on the Urugu app. We're not operating on an African app. And that's one of the biggest challenges facing Africans today, because whenever we have a view, it's based on the operating system, that the app system that the Uruguayans put in our head, that we've been indoctrinated with. And we're trying to get away from that. So that's why we keep talking about how do we decolonize the systems, because there's no way, you know, I say for the last 65 years that most African countries have gained independence. And look at where we are, deliberately underdeveloped. A lot of us can blame our governments for saying our governments are corrupt. But what mechanisms are governments using? The mechanism that we're using is basically the colonial mechanisms. Basically, no African government has just sat down and deconstruct and decolonize the system that they're using to govern the continent. They're not doing that. So if you're using a system that was given to you, it's for you to, because I call our governments mission managers. You have a system that you're mission managing. So you're a gatekeeper of. So how do you expect the system to work for you? Because all you're doing is managing the system for the Uruguay.
Brother, are you hearing yourself as you speak and the topic that we have today? And the topic that we have today?
Yes, I know.
Like, let that sit in. Okay, go on.
Yeah. So you hear what I said. So it's gonna I know. So guys, and this is what we're dealing with, because a lot of us don't want to think about it. We think it's normal. but there's nothing normal about what we're doing. It's basically something that like I said this before, we're using the wrong app.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're using the wrong app, it basically you're misfiring all the time. And this is one of the biggest challenges confronting the mindset of Black people, because don't forget the Yoruba educated you. You're a coconut. A lot of you don't want to accept this, but we are. So you haven't had that, that's why we personally, me, myself and Unduku, I say we, because I know what she's doing as well. That's why we had to re-educate ourselves. In as much as we use the systems that we have to actually communicate, but you had to look inwards to look outwards. So everything that we're following, does it work for us? Has it worked for the collective? Because a few people benefit from this. So don't get me wrong. Some people have got their trinkets and mirrors and they love it. But when we're looking at, as Africans, what we look at, what I personally, how I gauge success is if at least 80% of the people, 80% are living well, and they have dignity in living. That's basically what I see as success. And unfortunately, only probably 5% of people are living in dignity, whereas the majority of us are suffering and smiling, like Fela Kuti would say. So this is why we have these conversations. Yeah, go on.
I wanted to give a background before we start and as we wait for Sis to come in, just so that we know, as we talk, we are grounded in this, right? I'm going to read Mama Marimba Ani's description of Urugu, because we're talking about negotiating with Urugu. Yeah. And then to the audience, when you hear the description, let us know in the chat if you actually think we can negotiate with Urugu. So I'm going to read the description. Urugu, a being in Dogon mythology which is responsible for disorder in the universe. This is a being conceived in denial of the natural order, which then acts to initiate and promote disharmony in the universe. In African cosmology, such a being is deficient in spiritual sensibility, is perpetually in conflict, is limited cognitively, and is threatening to the well-being of humanity. So we all want to negotiate with Urugu. I'll keep it there. I'll say less.
Yeah, as we say, for those of us who like to defend Urugu, because a lot of us, and I say it as the work we do, I see a lot of us defend it. We defend it, we defend it, even though it's baseless, but we do. And the reason for that is just a cognitive dissonance. The fact that, like I said, we're all coconuts. They've educated us. We have our diasporan brothers bringing solutions from Europe, from America, back to Africa. It's the same. It's basically the same plague that you're bringing back. You think you're helping, but until you decolonize the systems of what you're bringing back, you're not really helping us. Because as you can see globally, the world we live in has got so much to offer. Nobody needs to starve. Nobody needs to starve. Nobody needs to starve. But look at us today. Look at Africa today. Underdeveloped, resource rich, but poverty. And that is deliberate. It's deliberately done. So some of you can blame your governments for whatever and I can blame our governments for basically not doing certain things. But don't forget, all your governments, as you see them today, like I said initially, are gatekeepers and mission managers for the neo-colonial powers. They have no control. They have no power. And who's bucking that trend at the moment? Assimi Goïta, Chiani, and Ibrahim Traoré. 3 presidents. They are the anti-imperialist governments. The only 3 that we have in Africa today. And I see a lot of people will say, "Oh, yeah, but they're this and that." But forget about how they got there. They have a mission. They have an agenda. And like Malcolm X says, whatever way necessary. That's what Malcolm X said. So they got there through the military coup. So be it. They got control. So be it. So most African countries should be doing the same. Whatever way you can to actually get control of the systems that are yours, not theirs, but they control it. Hence, the rest of the continent is basically in poverty. Africa should not be poor. Everybody should basically, like they're doing, I don't want to use the UAE as an example, but if you look at UAE, the people in that country don't have to work because the government have built a system where they don't have to work. Africa has more. The whole continent, 1.4 billion people has more. We have resource rich, 60% arable land. We have everything. But unfortunately, we are using the wrong tools, the wrong mindset, the wrong education, the wrong politics, the wrong education, the wrong agricultural system. Basically, we're using everything wrong. Consequently, we're not moving forward. A lot of us are so educated, so Western educated, that you bring this in. And I always challenge people, look at the education. Let's talk about education, because we're about education. Look at education today. Okay, colonial education. In 2026, most African countries' education is colonial. It is colonial. So how do you expect to see change when your education is colonial? Basically, in 2026, what we're doing is basically we're indoctrinating the next generation to be the mission managers for the same people that we're trying to get rid of. And that's in their brains, it's ingrained in their brains. We tell them that what is African is not good enough. We have to look outwards to build. We're not building our own capacity. We're not developing education systems that's going to basically give our kids the courage, the push, the drive to be proud as Africans. We're not doing that. You know, I'm Nigerian, and when I'm in Nigeria, all I see is 2-year-olds speaking English. It infuriates me, gets me angry. English should be a second language. Our indigenous language should be the language that we should be teaching our kids in. That's basically, they should be very proficient in our language. We should be educated in our language. But we're not doing that. And some of us would come with the best English trying to impress. They try to impress, like, with the best English, the best this, the best that. But all you're doing is just being a gatekeeper of the systems and the chains that are holding you down. Hopefully, see if we can get our sister back. If you want to carry on, I'm going to check on the sister, see if we can get her back.
Yeah, I'm just going to continue.
It's going to be me and you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to continue, and I'm just going to continue using Mama Marimba Ani's words, because they're there, right? They're there. I don't need to keep talking, because usually when I say stuff, it's Nduku, you think your way is the only way. So let me give you Mama Marimba Ani's way, right? Because I'm done giving you my way. And she says, as we sit and prepare to talk about negotiating with Urugu on how we can get equity, she says, the European image of the non-European, the African, or their own antithesis reinforces these observations. Recognizable in it are all those things that they repudiate, that which they do not want to be. In their view, people of other cultures are basically irrational. Therefore, these people do not choose, they do not make decisions. They have no control over their destinies. This is what Europeans want the case to be. And consequently, they proceed to act in such a way as to bring that condition into being. Just as they struggle to become what they want to be, and in struggling, succeed, they must be the ones who control, in quotes, who control. That is, they represent rational man. Europeans devote their cultural lifetime to becoming what others is not necessarily desirable. Accordingly, the benefits of rationality must be shared. That is progress. It is irrationality that must be stamped out, subdued. That too is progress. Rationalization, efficient order, becomes rationality, control of the emotional. This combination is an essential ingredient of the European self-image, although such rationality might very possibly be considered the height or depth of the unreasonable in other cultures. So, Oladele, can we negotiate with the Europeans? You're muted. And it's unfortunate because we're getting into the meat of it, but I wanted Sis to present before we did, you know?
Yeah. I wish you did. Unfortunately, we can't negotiate, but this is our reality. Capitalism is the order of the day.
No, it's not. We don't have to. It's not our
We
reality.
don't have to.
Our reality is we need food, we need shelter, we need good health. So as long as we have that, we don't need to sit at tables negotiating things that don't mean anything with us.
I understand that.
People who don't understand negotiating, with people who think you're inferior and you cannot think for yourself. So the whole thing is a pretense.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
You believing that you can, well, they know you cannot. They're just making you feel good for the time. Go on, Oladele.
Yeah. But all I'm trying to say is, we need to get away from where we are to where we need to be. Okay, we need to go back to basics. What Mama Marimba Ani was saying to us. We need to go back to basics. Let's go to what we had, because what we had in the past was never broken. So what we have now is what was imposed on us. So in order for us to get away from where we are to where we need to go back to, obviously that we need to have parallel systems. Basically, we need to win ourselves up. And this was what me and you talk about all the time. We need to get away from it because, as we all know, it's not working for us. The advantage is always tilted to the colonizers. Always, they built the systems that way. So, like you said, and I agree with you, we cannot negotiate with them because there's no equity. And when people have a preconceived notion before they see you at the table, and they look down at you before they even sit with you. So what's the equity in that? Because before they even come to you, talk to you, they basically already dead. You know, they see us as nothing. So as Africans, let that resonate with you. How can you be, think they care? As somebody who was born and grew up in the West, I've lived amongst those people and I know how they operate. I basically taken my time to study the Yoruba because I was born here and I grew up here. So from my experience, I can relate and I can talk. And I can talk, I'll say authoritatively about this. And it's not about the people, it's about the system they built. And sadly, most people will enforce that system because it gives them the advantage. Not many people are willing to get away from that system. They will say they're your friends, but when it comes to the crunch of it, would you go against the system to be equitable with me? They would never want to give up that advantage. They would never do. Because if you say you're equitable with me, give up your advantage. Let's start from a level playing field. Then we're talking about being friends. But as long as we have systems that are built that gives them the advantage, guys, there's just there's nothing there. So I think these are the kind of conversations that we need to have. They're uncomfortable for a lot of people because a lot of you so believe in it, you can't get away from it. But it's taken us time to get to where we are. Our thinking has become this because we've questioned everything. And when you question the system, it gets me angry that what I see, a lot of us Africans don't see it. A lot of us are the same people who are going to basically reinforce it and back it up and defend it. As you would defend the religion, you would defend the education, you would defend the cash crop economy, which basically takes stuff away from Africa instead of us growing food for ourselves. We have cash crops in Africa, which has been exported out to their lands. We back up all these things. Yet we're looking for equity.
You see that request in the chat? Yes.
Yeah.
So the one thing before I read one last thing from Yurugu, the book written by Mama Marimba Ani, and this is a quote she takes from Ayikwe Ama, who's another brilliant African writer. Ayikwe Ama book, 2000 Seasons, I've mentioned it before. That book will have you thinking completely differently if you are a critical thinker once you read it. Yes. He does a good put you in their shoes type of thing where you actually see the reality of stupidity, our naivety, what does Marimbani call it? Xenophilia. Xenophilia is when you see good in everyone, even your enemies, like you can't tell who's your enemy. Everyone is good and you're good to them and all that, right? And that is something that we Africans suffer from. So she says, I was going to say, to point out, like, how do you, years after, sit to negotiate with someone who's broken treaties left and right and sign treaties with someone who's done nothing but break treaties? They've never kept not one treaty with Africans, not one treaty with indigenous peoples, broken them left and right. We see in the case of Menelik, Emperor Menelik and Empress Taitu, they're deceiving, the Italians are deceiving them. They have a copy of an agreement in Italian, and they have a copy of an agreement, the same agreement in Amharic.
I read about that.
And they say to Taitu, Empress Taitu, that the Italian ambassador, they say the same thing. Just go ahead and sign the Amharic one. Empress Taitu says to her emperor, I warn you, my emperor, do not trust these people. See what they're doing to others around us, as in the other nations. See what they're doing to others around us. Do not trust them. Emperor Menelik insists on signing and having good relations with the Italians. Because the Amharic version is not saying they're going to be colonized. It's not. The Italian version is. And so Empress Titus says to him, okay, fine, but I'm going to ask you one favor. Once you find out, and you will find out, that they are actually deceiving us, allow me to be the one who gets his balls, literally his testicles, because they used to take the testicles of their enemies and put them in jars. And he takes this ambassador, she takes the ambassador and walks him to the room where they have these testicles in jars, and assures him that his will be joining the rest on the shelf, because she knows he's deceiving them. And sure enough, it comes to pass that he was deceiving them. She prepares for battle and she leads the battle against the Italians, and they win. So this is who we're talking about. People who have left and right, up and down, broken treaties. That is who they are. So how do you, if you're thinking critically and using the brain that you were given by your creator, sit and negotiate with them again? You know, once you know, this is the thing, when we know better, we must do better. It's one thing if you don't know, because we are miseducated. It's one thing if you're ignorant. It's one thing if you've never found out this history. But once you do, you have to move differently. So here is, she quotes, Mama Marimba Ani quotes Ayikwe Ama in her book, Yurugu. Toward a vision of the human spirit, Ayikwe Ama writes, what a scene of carnage the white destroyers have brought here. What a destruction of bodies. What a death of souls. Against this, what a vision of creation yet unknown, higher, much more profound than all erstwhile creation. What a hearing of the confluence of all the waters of life, flowing to overwhelm the ashen desert's blight. What an utterance of the coming together of all the peoples of our way, the coming together of all people of the way. Their news was also of relationships, of a beauty still to be realized, of paths to be found. Their news was of the way, the forgotten and the future way. All beauty is in the creative purpose of our relationships. All ugliness is in the destructive aims of the destroyer's arrangements. The mind that knows this, the destroyers will set traps for it. But the destroyer's traps will never hold that mind. The group that knows this and works knowing this, that group itself is a work of beauty, creation's work. She says some more stuff, Mama Rimbani, and then at the end, she ends with Ayikwe Ama. This is the last part of the book, is a quote from him. It is our destiny not to flee the predator's thrust, not to seek hiding places from destroyers left triumphant, but to turn against the predators advancing, turn against the destroyers, and bending all our soul against their thrust, turning every stratagem of the destroyers against themselves, destroy them. That is our destiny. That is our destiny. He actually says it. Sorry, that was me, but he actually says it. That is our destiny, to end destruction utterly, to begin the highest, the profoundest work of creation, the work that is inseparable from our way, inseparable from the way. So when we talk about, and that's the, for those of you who hear me talk about this is our way, I first encountered that way of saying that through Ayikwe Ama when we were reading 2000 Seasons. So, which is why I say, and I don't just repeat these things because I adore Ayikwe Ama. No, I repeat them because as I'm critically thinking and reading and analyzing, I'm like, that sounds like a sound way of saying this. It resonates with me. My spirit is at peace when I hear this and I say it and I repeat it. I don't feel like I'm being who I'm not. I feel like I'm actually centering myself more in who I am. So this is why I embrace people like that. And so, yes, we need to exist because they've put us in a situation where to survive, we must use their systems, but not with everything. Not with everything. These deals of resources and all that, we don't need to be on the table with them. Because guess what? They don't need to get resources from us. More importantly, we don't need to give them to them. We don't. And we do not need to acquire billions and have, what's the term that they use for economy again? GDP, highest GDP in the end, show up on the New York Times. Kenya is the best country with the highest GDP because this is what they're pursuing. This is what we are pursuing when we say, let's negotiate.
It's the metrics, basically, what does not fit Africans.
Who's gonna sit with the devils in Switzerland and get the best deal of resources? Same Switzerland that makes chocolate that they call Swiss chocolate from cocoa that they make from Ghana. They take from Ghana. They don't, Switzerland cocoa by way of Ghana, on the package. They don't say that. They don't say that. It's Swiss. Yet there are no cocoa plantations or crops in Switzerland. And that's the same Switzerland you're going to sit with to think that you can have negotiate an equitable situation of any kind. So my plea to our people is, I want to go back to living in a mad hut. I want us to be okay with going back to living in a mad hut. I want us to be okay with going and using our hands to grow our food. I want us to be okay with not having Maseratis, not even having a car. I want us to be okay with walking miles to get from one place to the other. Mentally, I want us to be okay with making our own food. I want us to be okay with not having to go to restaurants and post, look at the food I ate from the Michelin, whatever level restaurant and the Michelin chef. I want us to be okay with not that. I want us to be okay with not having red bottoms. I want us to be okay with Africa not looking like Europe, with African buildings not looking like Europe. I want us to be okay with not having a London in Africa. I want us to be okay with showing mad huts everywhere and nature and balance and food everywhere and trees and no concrete. Like you look in Africa for concrete and you can't even see it. I want us to be okay with that because that will sustain life and well-being for our people.
Hello, can you hear us? Hello?
Amne, try going off video, do audio, because if you do video takes more bandwidth. Yeah.
When did I stop?
See, now
when did I?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, you haven't even started. You haven't even started yet.
No, I've been yapping away for like, oh God.
Yes.
So let's start all over again. I've put a topic up. Let's start from the beginning.
My goodness.
How can Africa negotiate equity deals in systems built for hegemonic powers? We know there's no equity. So you're a negotiator. Please take it away, my sister.
Can you hear?
We can hear you loud and clear. We can hear you.
Yes. Okay. So let me just do this. So I'm just doing something with my thing so that it's fine. Just give me 2 seconds, please.
Yeah, guys, just bear with us, guys. Be patient with us as you always do. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's go. Okay, so I'm going to start with a number. Okay, let me start with a number. When an African government goes to international capital markets to borrow, it routinely pays somewhere near 10%. Okay, and a high income government, a developed nation, borrowing for the same purpose, they pay 1 to 3%. And that gap is always explained away in one word, which is risk. But here's what most people in that conversation never ask. It's risk of what, measured how, and decided by whom. So I've spent the last 15 years on both sides of that question, and I've sat in rooms negotiating bilateral investment treaties. I've structured multilateral financing frameworks, and I've been in the room representing governments across from multinational counterparties. And I've been also in the room representing private capital across from governments. And I have seen the architecture from both sides of the table. And so I want to spend the next few minutes showing you how it's actually built and then showing you how it can get renegotiated. Because the honest answer to why does Africa pay more is not just simply history, and it's not simply prejudice, but it's design. And design can be redesigned, but only by the people who really understand it well enough to rewrite it and not just protest it. So I'm going to start with the architecture. So I'm going to name the three systems that actually set the terms before an African government or a company ever sits down at the table. So first, you have the credit rating agencies, and three of them, which is Moody's, the S&P Global, and they rate 95% of the world's debt. Now, this is not an exaggeration for effect or, drama. That's the actual concentration of who decides the cost of capital for entire nations. Okay. And the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, made a study that estimated that African countries lose close to 75 billion US dollars. And that's more than all the official development assistance to the continent combined, because the rating models, they don't fully account for the structural and the data differences of African economies. And to be fair to the other side of that argument, and I think intellectual honesty matters, some independent research pushes back on the idea that there's a deliberate Africa penalty. But even the skeptics, I think, agree on this, is that the model themselves are opaque. It's really, it's not very clear. Like I said, I asked those questions before. Designed, the risk of what, measured how, decided by whom. The system in itself is extremely opaque, and I think that it's also important to say that it's backward looking, and it's also built almost entirely without African input, so that on its own is the problem, I think, that is worth solving. The second part of this architecture is the IMF and the World Bank. And these institutions, they provide financing that many African governments genuinely need, okay? But the financing comes with conditionalities, right? So fiscal targets, structural reforms, policy commitments that are negotiated from a position where one side needs the money, and that's usually the African governments need the money more than the other side that needs to lend it. And that asymmetry shapes everything downstream: the budget priorities, the subsidy policy, how fast a country can move on its own industrial strategy. Then you have the third, which is the bilateral investment treaties. And Africa is party to over 500 of these, and many were signed in the 1960s through the 1990s, when newly independent states were desperate for capital and had almost no negotiating capacity or precedent to draw on. And those treaties gave foreign investors very strong protections, protection from expropriation, fair and equitable treatment guarantees, direct access to international arbitration, often without placing equivalent obligations to the investor or the contracting nation, right? Because these bilateral investment treaties are between two nations. And between 1993 and 2023, there were at least 171 known arbitration cases brought against African states under these treaties. And I think that number is probably understated, because many disputes are settled quietly, off the record, and before they ever even become public. And there's another one that I think I want to spend some real time on, because that's, I think, the piece missing from most conversations, versions of this conversation, is the World Trade Organization and the way it quietly enforces who is allowed to add value to their own resources and who isn't. So that's the board. You have the rating agencies that price the risk. you have the multilaterals that set the conditions, then you have the treaties that define the rules of engagement if something goes wrong. And honestly speaking, by the time an African government or a company sits down to negotiate an actual deal, most of the terrain has already been decided by systems that it didn't even design. But that's just, that's the rule of the game. That's the architecture that's in place. So I want to go deeper on one piece of that architecture, because I think it's the most important shift happening on the continent right now, and it doesn't get talked about enough, I would say. So for decades, the world has treated natural resources as a commodity question. So looking at it from the perspective of price, supply, and demand. But we're seeing that era is over, and every major power now treats natural resources as a security question, critical minerals, energy. And if you look at the history of how a lot of the African mining frameworks were written, you start to understand why the continent has struggled to capture value from resources that it physically owns. So take Tanzania's original mining framework. Tanzania has a very unique history, because when it got its independence, it was during the time of the Cold War, and it basically had a choice of free market liberalization, free market economics, capitalism, or it had the choice of socialism. And Tanzania went with the choice of socialism. What does that mean? It means that Tanzanian markets were very much closed, highly protectionist. Only the state was basically controlling everything and doing business. So it didn't really have when you look at the neighboring countries, let's say Kenya, for example, it had foreign investors coming into its country very early on, because Kenya was already playing the game of these Bretton Woods institutions, WTO, and all these other institutions. Tanzania, that was not the case. Eventually, after the failed economics of Ujamaa, and a lot of pressure, Tanzania decided that, okay, let's move away from socialism, and let's adopt, free markets, capitalism, and join all these organizations and start basically playing to the tune of the global architecture. So when the first Mining Act came into force, there was effectively no real parliamentary debate on it. And this isn't even unique to Tanzania. And by the way, this is not some conspiracy. If you take the time to go and look at the Hansards of the parliament, you will see that there was no debate. It was basically a mining code that was tabled and adopted unanimously with no debate whatsoever. And this is not unique to Tanzania. It's really across the continent. You'll find legal frameworks that were substantially drafted with the interests of multinational capital already embedded in the text, and adopted by governments that needed the capital that came attached to them. So I want to be very precise here about what I mean, because there wasn't a gun to anyone's head, and there isn't a gun to anyone's head usually. It's really an architecture. We're talking about this architecture, right? It's the concessional loans, the budget support, the technical assistance, so the aid offered in a package where accepting a resource framework favorable to outside capital was simply the price of admission. Okay, but now it's changing very fast. We see across the Sahel, Mali's renegotiated mining code, Niger's uranium disputes with the French multinationals and French government, Burkina Faso's push towards great state ownership. But you're also then seeing Ghana as well, and Tanzania. You're watching governments that they conclude the same thing. They have come to the conclusion, at the same time, which is that extraction without local value addition is no longer politically or economically acceptable. And I don't think it's an accident that so many of the continent's active conflicts sit on top of its most valuable resource deposits. Because when a resource is treated as a security asset by everyone except the country that owns it, that imbalance, I think, it eventually produces instability. Now, Tanzania is actually the case study I point to the most because I'm from Tanzania. I do a lot of work with multinational companies, but also governments as well. And I negotiate a lot of these framework agreements. So Tanzania in 2017 didn't just talk about resource sovereignty, right? It legislated it. And under the late John Pombe Magufuli, the new mining laws, they really gave the government a mandatory free carried interest of at least 16% in mining projects with room to go up to 50%. They raised royalties, and most importantly, they required local beneficiation instead of raw export. And critically, they also removed the right to international arbitration for natural resource disputes entirely. So any dispute now has to be heard in a Tanzanian tribunal under Tanzanian law. And dispute is also a very important part of that architecture that I spoke about. One of the most renowned arbitration forums is actually attached to the World Bank, right? So it's really that kind of architecture, those kind of pressure points that are pressed in all directions, so that certain nations can achieve what it is that they want. So when you look in Tanzania, all of this is actually law. So there is no compromise to negotiate because the compromise has already been made by the parliament before you even, sit down with the government. So now Africa hasn't been alone in trying this. I think it's important also to look at outside of the continent for a moment, because Indonesia ran essentially the same experiment on nickel. And I think that the outcome is quite instructive. Granted, Indonesia does not have the same development trajectory as Tanzania, for example, or a lot of the African countries, yes. But I think the point here is that Indonesia was also playing the game of, we are the market, come and get, raw materials, they're exported, beneficiation is added outside and then resold to the same country with the natural resources at a markup. And Indonesia banned the export of raw nickel ore and required domestic processing, and deliberately chose to build a downstream battery and stainless steel industry at home instead of exporting the raw material. Now, what had happened is that the European Union took Indonesia to the World Trade Organization dispute mechanism, right, because of this, arguing that the ban violated global trade rules against export restrictions. And I think it's important to say that it does violate a lot of the rules under the World Trade Organization framework, because that framework is really built in a way that it completely bans, I would say, unless countries negotiated for reserves. But when you look, hardly any African countries negotiated any meaningful reserves. So if you don't have any reserves, it means that you cannot implement local content policies. You cannot essentially add have policies for beneficiation, because that is basically putting restrictions on export, which is regulated under these global trade rules. Now, in late 2022, WTO panel actually ruled against Indonesia. There was no real surprise there. Indonesia appealed because you have to appeal. But it appealed into the WTO appellate body that had been unable to hear a single case since December 2019, because under Trump's administration back then, the US basically had blocked every new judicial appointment to it. So the ruling against Indonesia has never actually become final, and Indonesia kept the policy in place anyway, and its nickel export revenue went from roughly $2 billion a year to over $30 billion. And Indonesia's own trade officials have said, in effect, that we may lose the appeal eventually, but by the time we do, the industry will already be built, and that will be the point. But also more importantly is that there's a price to sovereignty. I think it's important to say this and for it to be very clear. There's a price to sovereignty. And a lot of countries are, like Indonesia, like other countries, are deciding that it's okay. Yes, we know that we're violating these rules that no longer serve us, whether it's the World Trade Organization laws or it's the bilateral investment treaties, for example. Yeah, we are violating them because they do not serve us. But countries are actually now making the calculation and being like, well, you know what? Are we going to stay in these systems that do not favor us? Or should we just do what we want, gain sovereignty back, and pay probably a heavy penalty? And they're deciding, yes, we're going to do that. We're going to pay that heavy penalty because we have so much more to gain, right, by being sovereign. So I think that's the lesson that's really worth sitting with, is that the WTO's own enforcement architecture, also the very mechanism that's designed to punish exactly this kind of local content policy, it has effectively been paralyzed by the same power that built it, the US, because that power's own trade posture has shifted towards protectionism too. And I think that that's really important for African countries as well, to understand those global dynamics currently, because the US, being the country that has basically created a lot of these architectures, currently is going backwards on this and putting a lot less funding into a lot of these, organizations. So I think that African countries can really, they have leverage. And I think that is that the rules that because we're told that these rules, and especially sold to the developing world, they're universal and they're non-negotiable, but they were never really actually treated that way by the powers who wrote them. And we're seeing this, right? If it's convenient, they apply them. If it's not convenient, they disapply them. And I think that it's only a matter of time before more African governments and the companies that are operating here, they fully internalize this, that some multinationals, I see that some multinationals, they're still negotiating as if local content and beneficiation requirements are up for discussion. I see a lot of companies and also a lot of countries that cannot believe the posture that certain African countries are taking. And they think this is just something passing, but they're just going to go back to their own ways. And, the rules are going to be rewritten. But, increasingly, this isn't just the case. It really isn't the case. And the countries that have gotten the furthest, so Tanzania being the clearest example on this continent, it didn't negotiate that position at the table. And I think that's very important. I think the countries that are deciding, they're deciding for themselves and they're legislating this. They're legislating all these things first, and then the negotiations start. None of these countries are actually going and asking the opinion of, what do you think? Would you be okay with us? Because obviously the answer is no, we're not okay. And they're going to attack with, you've got all these rules, all these binding agreements, all these treaties that have been signed. You cannot go, you cannot go against this sanctity of contracts, sanctity of treaties, blah, 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 right? So I think a lot of countries are just saying, well, you know what, let's just, adopt the same, I guess, America first policies. A lot of countries are saying Tanzania first or Ghana first policy. Let's legislate what it is that we want. And then we just go, and that would be the starting point of the negotiations. Now, I want to be careful here because I think there's a version of this conversation that stops at the system is rigged. And it's true, the system is rigged, but I don't really think that that's necessarily very useful. I think it doesn't really help the person that's sitting across from, the term sheet with a term sheet next week. I think that the useful reframe is that these systems were built by someone, which means that they can be rewritten by someone. I think this is not given the weight. I think it's not a question of just like leaving the system, entirely, because no country can operate as an island. It's just not possible. You do need rules. I think you do need global rules in my opinion. But I think that it's about how can we rewrite these rules? But in the meantime, before they're rewritten, I think you have to continue negotiating from within. I don't think that there is a choice, there is any other choice than that. You have to continue negotiating from within, but you need to have people who understand exactly where the discretion sits, where the leverage actually is. And, they really understand also how the fine print really works. And so I think that you cannot negotiate equity into a deal that you don't fully understand the value of. And I mean, your side's value. And sometimes I see that some African governments don't necessarily fully understand that. No, they don't, it's not about the value the other side has told you that it has or has told you that you have, but it's really about you truly understanding what is the value that you truly have. And I see that too many African counterparties, they negotiate as if the party across the table is the only option in the world, and that's just not the case. And I think that the moment a counterparty senses they are the only bidder, well, your price basically goes down and you lose leverage. And the moment they sense that there is a real competitive tension, well, your price goes up, even if you never do business with the alternative, right? But even if leverage isn't always used, but it's often just known about. And that I think that also the legal and regulatory architecture, this is really where the deals are actually won or lost. And it's the part almost nobody outside the legal room ever hears about. What is the dispute resolution seated? Where is the dispute resolution seated? Under what law? This single clause, usually buried, on page 40 of some annex, it basically determines who has the home field advantage if the deal ever goes wrong. And I think it's also important to say that the deal in Africa, within the context of the architecture in place, which, for example, in a lot of these bilateral investment treaties, African countries are obliged to have certain legal frameworks fixed and unchanged for, let's say, a minimum of 10 years, of 20 years. That's just not possible for a country that is developing, and there is a lot of public pressure, public policy pressure internally. We're seeing a lot of youth in African countries that don't want to just do business as usual. They want jobs, they want opportunities. And guess what? Jobs and opportunities are not going to be built off raw materials, beneficiation, local content, all of these things matter. And so I think that the deals are going to be broken. They are going to go wrong because African governments, increasingly because of that pressure that they feel at home, they cannot play to the global, architecture that we're talking about. And I think that Africa has learned this lesson at a real cost, which is why you're seeing states like South Africa, for example, they're terminating legacy bilateral investment treaties entirely, and they're moving disputes into domestic courts. You're actually seeing Tanzania, for example, renegotiating bilateral investment treaties. when they come to expiration, they're renegotiating them, not under the same terms because it does not work, and we're seeing the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think, under the investment protocol, Africa's own continental framework, adopted it, I think, in 2022. It was deliberately built to correct exactly that imbalance, right? It's had enough influence that arbitration practitioners elsewhere are now studying Africa's model as a blueprint for reform. So what that treaty or contract actually require of the investor, not just the state, and historically almost nothing. The newer generation of African negotiated treaties is closing that gap because building in investor obligations, preserving the state's right to regulate in the public interest. So a government isn't legally just boxed in from responding to its own public health, own public policy, own environmental needs in 10 years time or in 20 years time into a concession. Those things are changing, and local content beneficiation, not as political talking points that are, tagged onto press releases, but really as hard drafted enforceable terms. Who processes the resource, who trains the workforce, who owns the equity, not just who takes the royalty, which has been the conversation so far in terms of the architectures that have been existing. A lot of African countries have just been told that you should be happy about the jobs that we're bringing to you. And by the way, those jobs are never sophisticated jobs, high skilled jobs. They're usually the lower paying jobs, so you're supposed to be satisfied with that and the taxes that you're going to gain from that. And also you're going to be satisfied by the royalties that you're paying, the royalties that we are going to be paying you. And that's it. There was no transfer of technology. There was no equity. And I think that this is exactly the shift that I described earlier with Tanzania's 2017 laws, the difference between local content as an aspiration and local content as legislation.
Okay.
Do I still have time?
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. Have you got more to say before? Because I've got a lot of questions. I've got loads of questions I want to ask you because I want to push back in some of the things that you're saying. So are you okay? Yeah. Are you ready for that?
Yeah, okay. Sure.
We can give 5 more minutes because I don't think sis was done.
You want to finish off? You can finish off.
Yeah, sure. So, I think, okay, let's maybe look at where this is heading, right? The good news that we're seeing is that we're seeing right now the African Credit Rating Agency, for example, that's been established under the Africa Union's peer review mechanism, is essentially preparing to issue its first sovereign ratings this year. And it won't replace the big three overnight, and it will have to earn market trust the hard way, the way any new rating agency does, right? But for the first time, we're seeing African sovereigns are building this domestically alternative assessment that is sitting next to an international one. And the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement investment protocol is doing something similar for treaty architecture. And it's, I think, notable that international arbitration practitioners are actually now looking at Africa's drafting as a model for fixing problems in the global system and not the other way around. And some of the most important work is happening at the level of the Pan-African coordination. So regional model bilateral investment treaties are being drafted at the African Union level, but also even at the regional level, like the East African Community level, shared negotiating capacity, governments comparing notes on what terms they've accepted so that the next country doesn't repeat the same mistake in isolation. I get that a lot with investors now saying, you know, we went to Kenya and basically the Kenya revenue authorities, the Kenya, you know, some of the institutions that they were negotiating, they knew exactly what the deal was that they got in Tanzania, right? For example. So we're seeing increasingly that African governments are waking up and, realizing that they have to work. They have to work together, because I think the single biggest historical weakness in Africa making was never about intelligence or ability, but it is about negotiating alone. Now, how does Africa negotiate equity in a system built by someone else? I don't think it's by refusing to sit at the table and I think that it's not by pretending the table is fair when it isn't. I think you negotiate equity by knowing exactly which parts of the architecture are fixed, which parts are just habits dressed up as inevitability, and you negotiate it by building real alternatives because you never need to use them. You negotiate it clause by clause, seat by seat, because equity was never going to be handed across that table. It was only ever going to be built. And I think it's going to be built by people who understand that they understand the architecture well enough to rewrite their own part in it. And, I think that that's the work. And it certainly, this is the work that I intend on doing.
Thank you very much for that. That's a powerful one. At least one thing I like about what you're saying is at least something's been done.
Slowly, right? I think that there's so much doom when people talk about Africa. I think we focus a lot on the problems, and yes, the problems do exist, the challenges do exist for sure, but I think that it's wrong to say that there's absolutely nothing happening and that, nobody is doing anything or nobody is thinking of better, because there's so many examples of African countries waking up and governments wanting to do things differently. I don't think it's happening fast enough. And unfortunately, it's also not collective, right? It's not uniform. It's not the 54 countries that are all aligned and saying, yes, we're going to move together. There's still a lot of countries that are still very, very comfortable with the architecture.
Yeah, it's like the legacy. It's a legacy that Kwame Nkrumah was trying to protect, where we need to pull together. Obviously, they're going slowly, and obviously they've been picked apart, because as long as you stay isolated, then they're going to deal with you in an isolated way. So you know what? Let me let's go by what you started with. You talked about the ratings, you talked about the institutions, you talked about the finance, and then you talk about the bilateral treaties. Those are four different things. So my question for you is, looking at all these things that you put in place, none of it is African. Not one of them is African.
Yeah.
So why does Africa still have to go by their playbook?
Yeah. Okay. So, because it's. I think there are several things. One, we're seeing actually that countries are. I don't think you can remove yourself entirely just like that, kind of switch off the lights, and remove yourself just like that. I don't think that it's possible. I think that you can only do it slowly, because there's so many things that are ingrained. That architecture influences so many things in even the national architecture itself. Right. So I think that it's something that needs to be done slowly. And we're seeing countries, for example, in Tanzania, tackle these things like, okay, they've decided that they're going to go after the whole local content issue that is basically regulated under the World Trade Organization. And they're not going to play by that book anymore. Right. And so I think that I think that countries are starting to remove themselves slowly. It's not happening fast enough, but I don't think it's possible to just switch off the light, because too many things exist that would go really seriously wrong for any country that tries to do that.
You know what? Let me say that. Okay, based on what you're saying. So what you're saying simply is, because they put the systems in place. I don't know if you read how Europe underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. I don't know. Have you read that book, Amne?
No, I haven't, but it's in one of my.
I think that's one. As a lawyer and somebody who deals with these things, I think that's one book you need to pick up and read. How Europe underdeveloped Africa is very important.
Not just pick up, Olade. Let me jump quickly and you can continue. Not just pick up. It is your duty. If you're doing this work, you must read that book. Like, you have to actually get it immediately you get off this broadcast and read it before you sit down for the next negotiation.
Because it's so important. Because it basically puts a lot of things in perspective. Because as I brought you here, what we want to hear from you is actually that you're, as somebody who's a negotiator who deals with these people, how they deal with it. And you've given us a background which is actually, like you said, things are pushing back. But this is what I see. A system that was built that didn't have us in mind at all. We was basically built to keep us down. In 2026, why are we still begging to be part of that same system? You know, you're saying that, okay, we need to do it gradually. But don't forget, in the DRC right now, kids are dying. They can't, you know, they're dying. There's in Ghana, the Galamsey is going on. You see what's going on. You know, these things are happening, and people are dying every single day. So for us to wait to dismantle a system that's killing us every single day. Sometimes when I look at it, I think what's basically we need to think differently, because these Urugu that we're talking about are brutal. And sorry, before I let you come back, I'm just gonna read a quote here that I wrote on my Substack. Give me a second. I'm just gonna read the quote. And this is basically how I look at, obviously, somebody who was born in the UK, and this is how I look at the Urugu, because these people, basically, I'll say now, maybe not for you, but they have no soul. And this is my thoughts. This is basically what Marimba Annie said. He said, until an African can say and mean that there are no European people on earth that he or she can trust, they will never be psychologically liberated. This is what Marimba Annie said. That's another book that you need to read, Urugu. So the people that we're talking to, basically, they are not ready to basically they're not ready to give us nothing. In as much as you say you're negotiating, but everything we're looking at is their frameworks. None of it's ours. And the crutch of the matter is this is capitalism. Capitalism is basically what's drives us all here, which is basically greed-driven. So in a nutshell, basically everything we're focusing on trying to negotiate and deal with is basically a capitalist driven that's basically meant to extract and take from us and basically keep people poor. So Amne, you're a lawyer, how do we dismantle this damn thing? Because all these things that we're doing, 80%, 90% of Africans are not going to benefit. No matter what they do, it's going to still get the gatekeepers and the mission managers who are going to benefit a few people. The systems are not benefiting the majority. How do we build frameworks that's going to benefit the majority and not a few people sitting in a room and not the few rich Africans who are benefiting for their family? How do we build systems that are actually going to benefit the majority? And this is what we're not focusing on. I'll leave it to you.
But I do think, though, that there are certain things that are happening on the continent that are going in that direction. So the reason why I think that you can't just leave, like just switch off the lights and just leave and say we're not going to do it anymore, because there is some I think we have to be realistic in terms of where a lot of African countries are right now in their development trajectory, and a lot of African countries are poor. They have natural resources, but they're poor. The poverty is very much there. Number one. Number two, there is this dependency that has been built over so many years that it cannot just be unbuilt, in one day, right? It has to be progressive. Number three, Africa does not have its own even capital markets to really speak of, right? They depend on the capital markets in the UK, in the US. There is no internal Africa capital market there. Countries can act and raise funding in Africa with African capital to build, and to serve their people. But you are seeing that Africa is waking up. I agree that it's not fast enough, but it is happening, because you have institutions, for example, forget about the Africa Development Bank shareholders, U.S. shareholders and all that. But the Afri-Exim Bank, for example, which is doing so much work in terms of
don't forget they have external shareholders as well.
They have US connections as well.
They have US connections in that one, my sister. They do. So
the Afri-Exim Bank is purely central banks of African central banks that are there.
No. You need to dig deeper.
And who is in the African central banks?
Okay, that's a good point.
Yes, it's co-opted. Don't forget, Urugu they never let you on your own. They're gonna find a way to get in. They want a piece of the pie all the time. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah. But when you look at, for example, Dangote's story of how he built that refinery and the resistance that he had, at the end of the day, actually, it was Afri-Exim Bank that ended up coming through for the financing. Right. When you look at Tanzania, largely, they have chosen one area to basically fall on the sword for, which is their natural resources. And I can tell you that the negotiation is largely that they are not exporting this anymore. And the frameworks are beneficial, actually, for the government and for its people. So it's not about being... it's not about doing everything at once, but I think you have to start somewhere. And I think I'm seeing certain countries start somewhere, like Tanzania.
Sorry, before you go, Nduku. So my next question then will be: are we really decolonizing our thought process when we do these things? Are we decolonized? Or are we still using the miseducation that we were given to deal with these people? Because if you're coming at it from a Eurocentric education that most of us have, when it comes to basically decolonizing the structures, we're still using the same systems. And before, I want to add something to that. You said we're learning our lessons. When the deals and the markets we are focusing on are not ours, and basically a 1.4 billion people haven't got a market. Why are we not focusing on ours? And why does it have to be everything to be to the West? Why are we not building like China did? Why are we not building a capacity in our own continent? Because we don't look at China. China could survive with.
You muted yourself.
Oh, did I mute myself? Sorry.
China can survive with.
China can survive without without outside. Because they've basically built a capacity that they can feed themselves. They can basically look after themselves. Why is Africa not building a capacity to build within 1.4 billion people? Why does that market have to be external all the time? And that's where the problem is, because we're always looking to them for a market. So we keep scrambling to fulfill and to basically lift up to whatever condition they put in, that we're trying to honor that, when we should be working so hard to bring things back into Africa. Let's build. That's because the market that they're looking for is our market, because they'll build it there and they'll bring it back to us. Please.
Yeah. Okay, so you've said several things there.
Yes.
But, I think, okay, on the question of the decolonizing the mindset, that is real. I mean, a lot of governments are forget about Western educated people that are in government, let's say, negotiating this, but you have, and I see this all the time, governments that are actually hiring Western institutions to represent their interests.
It's crazy.
Negotiating tables.
Imagine.
And they somehow think that they're more qualified than people like me or others that are, that basically would be patriotic, which is a very important aspect when you're in that room, right? So that still very much exists, unfortunately, and I think that it will take some time before it can be completely gone, but because also you have a lot of brainwashing from people who have spent, especially the elite and the middle class, a lot of them go outside to Western countries to be educated there, and they kind of come back with the mentality of white is right.
They become Negro-European.
Yeah. That's very true, and that is a problem. And I think that though that is going to change, because when you look at what's happening in a lot of the countries, the youth, these Gen Z and all these generations that are coming after, they don't have those possibilities or access of going outside, but they're the ones who are pushing a lot of the policies, pushing governments to adopt a lot of the policies that are not Western, dominated policies. So I think that with time, somehow there is going to be a meeting somewhere where maybe there'll be more people in government that are less Eurocentric or Western-centric, and things can progress. Now, on the question of like why Africa doesn't negotiate for the interest of its people, and the comparison, I guess, to China, where China was very strong and is that we have to remember that China didn't actually enter into all these Bretton Woods institutions like the World Trade Organization. They only entered into the World Trade Organization, I think, in 2000 or so. They did so when they had already developed their market, meaning that they were protectionist until the end.
They were smart. Why can't we be smart?
Yeah, they were very smart. But I think, the thing is that with a lot of African countries, I think independence came with a lot of these strings, right? We'll give you the independence, but you will be part of you will sign to all these different, World Trade Organization, all these, different multilateral bodies that essentially then kept a lot of these countries in the same place, It's such a complicated question, but I think that being inside the room, I have to say that I see that there is progress. There is some progress, meaning that when you look, for example, on the natural resource side, even on the local content side, for example, more and more of these countries are choosing the fight, right? They're choosing which fight to go for and which one to not enter. And I think that a lot of the African countries are understanding the importance of natural resources, and that's the area that they've chosen to fight, where it's non-negotiable now for a lot of the countries, and they are negotiating frameworks that are benefiting the people.
Okay, thank you. Nduku, I think Nduku's got a few questions for you. So yeah, I'll let Nduku.
It's interesting because you asked the one, because I was going to ask, have you read How Europe Underdeveloped Africa? The other book I would like to know if you've read, Amne. Have you read Confessions of an Economic Hitman?
Oh.
Yes, I did read that a few years ago, but yes, I have read it, yes.
So if you've read it, why would you say then that no gun was held on someone's head?
Yes, I see the point there. Yeah.
Because he literally confesses that that's what they do behind closed doors. Before that leader even sits with his cabinet, there's a gun held to his head. Right? And that's the importance of us reading critically, not just to read, but to read, to connect what we're reading to what is happening, and use it every time we are moving. The other book I'm going to ask you, Amne, to read is
Urugu.
You must read Urugu. It's going to help you understand who you're dealing with and what they really are. And once you read these books, you're going to be in meetings. And here, let me just give you a disclaimer. Let me just give you a disclaimer. What do you do for your pastime? Like, what do you do to reduce stress? Because I know the work that you do, I don't even need to ask you, brings you stress, a lot of stress. So what do you do to relieve stress?
Oh, that's a very good question. I exercise a lot because I have to. And then I spend a lot of time with my kids.
So I'm going to say increase that, because you're going to need it. Because once you read these books, you're going to be in those rooms with them and start seeing their heads turn and look like that.
Mm.
You're going to
Mm.
stop seeing the mask on them, and you're going to see who they actually are when you're in that rooms. Everything they say, you're going to see the lie in it. But it's important that you do. It's important that you do, because then you're not going to be used as a tool to trap African nations, right? And like, 'cause that's what's happening. Like, that's what's happening. I can't, for the sake of the audience, I can't come out and say this is a useless topic because we know we're dealing with Urugu. I have to be responsible as to how we hold the conversation so that we can learn from it, right? And so, as much as I am typically given how I understand these people, the type of person to say, why are we even having this conversation? I will be gracious for the sake of those who don't know what we're dealing with, right? You said one side needs the money more. So do you believe, Amne, Africa actually needs foreign money more than the world, Switzerland, United States, China needs African minerals, energy, agricultural land, labor, and markets?
Yeah. No, I definitely think that the world needs Africa more than Africa needs the world. I do
And so,
believe that.
do you see how that changes the dynamics of negotiating? Like, when you say we cannot completely leave the system, first of all, that's how China did it. They left the system. They decided they're not going to interact with these people. They're going to center themselves on Chinese culture. Like, they have, to this day, they have laws when it comes to TikTok. TikTok operates differently in China. Social
They have WeChat.
media
They have
in
WeChat.
general
They have
has
WeChat.
rules. It operates differently. So China is very much okay with struggling for a few years to remain authentically, what's the word? It's escaping me again. Sovereign, right? Not like African countries that are sovereign on the books, but they truly aren't sovereign. So the other person who decided to pull out cold turkey is Sankara and now Traore, without worrying, oh, what are we going to do? So I guess the next question for me is, when you say development and African countries are not developed, what do you mean by development?
So I just want to say something about that, which is like Ibrahim Traore, that, even he, for example, has had to take an IMF loan, because that's just the reality. You can remove yourself, but we keep comparing to China.
Quickly, the difference being that he did not accept conditionalities. That's the difference we don't understand. So the others are being held to accept conditionalities, and like the dum-dums, they accept conditionalities, and conditionalities that mean no funding for schools, no funding for health, like dire conditionalities that destroy your social systems. So the difference with Traore accepting the loan is that, yes, he understood that needed money, but he did not accept conditionalities. And that's the thing that we're not talking about when we say
He's paid
Traore
it back.
accepted an IMF loan. No, he said, to hell with you all. If you think I actually need the money, give it, no conditionalities, right? But also, why is the IMF saying yes? Because they understand that they cannot completely exclude Traore because he's on a mission to liberate us. And if they do, he's going to get more power. So they have to get their hands in it one way or another.
Yes, but I think the point here that I'm trying to make is that, yes, he got money from the IMF without conditionalities, but he got money from the IMF. So it's not really possible to do without, at this point in time, to do without all these multilateral organizations, all these countries, because, like I said, when you look internally, we don't have those architectures, I guess, to lean on. And I do agree, though, and this is why I was saying before they can be rewritten, we need to see how we can renegotiate from inside for better terms. And Traore has done so. There are other countries also examples that that are doing so. But I think when you look also in terms of the reality of a lot of African countries, there is issues around education. You know, are people investing enough in the education of the people? Are they investing enough in the health of the people? Do they have enough for their budget? You know, there are all those realities that are in place that I think that stop that make African countries desperate when they come to the table and they're looking for money, because they don't have that. They don't have, and they don't have any other counter system to rely on, to fall back on. You know, that's kind of that's the reality. That's kind of what I'm talking about when I say that Africa needs the money more than the West needs to give it to them. The reality is that, yeah, African countries do need the money because of the position that they're in.
But they're in the
Now, the
position that
question, I
they're
think, is
in.
how do we get out of that position? I think
But-
that's more constructive.
Right.
How do we get out of that position? And I don't think that it can be done. It can be done just overnight. And I think we're seeing the example of the likes of Ibrahima Traore. Okay, yes, he negotiated conditionalities, but the point is that he went to IMF and got a loan.
But the thing is, they're in that situation. African countries are in that situation because of the IMF loans. This is like the chicken and the egg thing. What came first? They're in that situation because of the IMF loans. Here's my question that I'd like to ask us all. Who said we have to develop in the same way that Europeans have developed? Who exactly said that to us? Who said that it's not okay for Africa to have mud structures as our buildings? Who said that? There's a very luxurious 5-star hotel, Serena, in Amboseli. Luxurious. Been there. Great time. Amazing place. All their buildings are built out of mud. 90% of their buildings are built out of mud. And it's a luxurious place. Like when you're in your room, it's luxury, it's good, it's mud. So who said that we cannot be the people who stand with nature and decide that concrete does not work for us? Concrete is bringing disease. Concrete is bringing high temperatures. Concrete, as in the building material. Concrete is bringing issues with drainage. We need to start building natural. Like, why do we have to have a European model of development? Why, please?
Yeah, I was going to say that. Who told us that we were underdeveloped anyway?
Yeah, I think that, no, I agree with that. I don't think that we need to have the same development trajectory as, you know, as other people. I think that we can define what our own development trajectory looks like, right? Whether it's in terms of, you know, the buildings that we're talking about, or the kind of education that we want to give our children. It's true that even when you look on the continent, a lot of the education system is imported from the West, right? It's just, I guess it's just the colonial hang-up, right? I think we're talking about, we're still working our way out of those systems, I would say.
But we are not even working our way out of the systems, right? Because as long as we are sitting at negotiating tables with them, thinking that we can rebuild negotiation tables with them, that we will never get out of it. We will continue in this cycle like gerbils, just running around until we die. I'll give 2 examples. Number one, we can get out immediately. I gave Traore as a modern example. Thomas Sankara completely dismissed the IMF and said, I want nothing to do with you. And in 4 years, he was able to develop his nation. His people helped build the railroads. They brought in education. The women, there was illiteracy problems. That women were educated. In 4 years, the illiteracy problem was gone. 4 years of just him and his people staying disciplined about doing things their own way. Without the IMF, he was able to do that. So it's possible. The thing is, are we Africans going to get to the mindset where we say it's better to work hard? And I'm reminded as I say this, and thanks to my elder and you know yourself when I say this, for making me read this book, The Perfect Nine by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I just read it yesterday. I was able to finish it quickly because I was using audio to read it. This reminds me of that. In the Perfect Nine, there's a chapter that talks about the journey. And the Perfect Nine, as you all know, the clans, the beautiful daughters of Agekoyo, who go on a journey with their suitors. They've been commissioned by Agekoyo to get something. And the journey is full of trials and challenges and all kind of like serious, dangerous, like meeting ogres and all that. But they keep pushing because they have a mission. Until they get there, they get what they were sent to get, and they come back. And the way back still has the same challenges. And what this reminds me is what I'm trying to get us all to understand. We will not get that thing, the well-being of our people, the sovereignty, good food, healthy food, no bombing, no wars in Africa, unless we go through that challenging, that journey with trials and challenges. And I always give the analogy of the Masai Mara River. Those animals in Tanzania know that at a certain point in the year, there's not going to be food in Tanzania. They cannot stay there and starve to death. But this is a river that they have to cross, and it's filled with crocodiles. And they understand that. But they understand that the chances of making it to Kenya, where it's greener at that time of the year, are higher. And for majority, remember, a majority of them to survive is higher if they cross that river and lose a few people. And to those who they lose, hopefully the animals get to the other side and they do their ritual in honor of them, right? The elephants I know do. I don't know about the other animals. But that's the point. We are in one area where we're losing more than we're gaining. The other side has us gaining more than we're losing. To get to that other side, there's a challenging path we must cross. But we must cross it to get here. And we're not in that mindset. We're busy worrying about our red bottom shoes and the big closets that we can walk in and show on Instagram.
Yeah, to be honest, because I sit with a lot of governments, I think that it's not all black and white. I do think that there is a beginning of change of mindset. Maybe it's not happening.
That's funny.
Sorry.
And that's the joke there. That's funny you say that because it is all black and white, as in black people and white people. But go on, sis.
Okay, but I meant that it's what I mean by that is I really do see that increasingly leaders are trying to do the right thing, especially towards their people, and they are trying to kind of get out of these systems, that have been built. So I just think that it's something that is going to take time. I think when we're not, but I think that it's not accurate to say that there's nothing happening, or a lot of these governments, I think, are also surviving, they have debts that they need to pay, because of all these debts that they take for all these development issues. They're not creating jobs fast enough. It's a whole myriad of things that I think that they're juggling with. And but I would say that the journey has started because I'm seeing it.
You're saying that they're struggling, but why are they struggling? Because they put themselves in the debt in the first place. So of course you're going to struggle.
But Oladile, Ruto is not struggling. Museveni is not struggling. Samia is not struggling. These leaders are not struggling, which is why they continue to do this.
Even Tinubu, Nigeria, you see how much debt he's putting Nigeria into. He's not struggling because personally they're okay. And they don't care because they're going to leave it behind when they leave.
Okay,
and that's one of the biggest.
I'm talking about the nation struggling and not the individual heads of states and all that.
Yeah,
right?
but the head of states don't really care about the people, because if they did, they would do otherwise.
And that's,
if they really cared,
if they really
cared, they would do otherwise. But they don't really care.
Yeah. And that's who's at the negotiating table, not the people. It's the heads of state at the negotiating table. So if they have a selfish mindset, how do we even start this conversation without talking about revolution? How?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But not everybody, by the way. I don't think it's everybody. First of all, on the negotiation table, it's not the heads of states. It's a lot of bureaucrats, and actually, you find a lot of these bureaucrats that are not necessarily politicians are actually quite patriotic, and they do want to do the right thing. That's the That's what I'm seeing. So
Here's what I'm gonna say, right? I don't care how many people come for me. I don't care if I'm proven to be wrong. I know 100% that none, zero of the negotiators at the table want the right thing for our people. Until I hear one negotiator saying, I'm not coming to this table, that's when I'll understand that they truly care about our people. Otherwise, it's self-serving, and it's either self-serving, it's miseducated, it's uninformed, but it is definitely not putting your people first. None of them. I don't care if you say I'm wrong. I truly don't care. I don't care if I don't have the numbers to prove risk. I don't care if I know finance or not. No one on the African negotiating table cares about Africa. None. All these nations have accepted conditionalities that destroy the social system. So none of them care about us. None.
Because Amne, just look at everything that's happening. In as much as they're trying, but how long are we gonna try for? When is basically things are gonna turn around? They're trying. It's just so slow that they're still protecting their egos at the table. They still are. Because if you truly want Africa to change, man, you need to flip this. You know, I was going to bring something up actually. Have you heard of the Pan-African $0 joint industrial policy?
Yes.
Have you heard about it? Where
yes.
you don't need money, but you can leverage what you have to build. Why are we not doing that? There's solutions out there, but we're not taking those solutions. We keep going back to the same people who are going to keep fleecing us. We don't really want to do the work. You see what we're saying?
We have laborers, let's get to work.
Fadel Kabub is basically going out there pushing this policy all over. He's everywhere. I don't know if you know Fadel Kabub because I sent the video to you. He's pushing this, saying this is, you don't need money to build. Just leverage what you have to get what you need. Just bind together with a few people and then you can actually, leverage that to build. But why are they not doing that? Why are they going to the IMF or the World Bank, the WTO,
So because Oladele's question ends up being rhetoric, sorry, brother. Let me just ask quickly, because you said before that the Ujamaa failed, right? That's how you phrased it. So how do you separate, when you say this, how do you separate internal policy mistakes from external economic pressures? And this is why it's important you read How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. How exactly did Ujamaa fail and fail?
Well, I think Ujamaa failed because of the context that it was in. It was during a period of the Cold War. Tanzania faced a lot of sanctions. So I think that those variables did not exist, meaning that there was no Cold War, that Tanzania had aligned itself to the Soviet Union and had faced a lot of sanctions, from the US. Maybe it would have worked.
So you actually think that if Tanzania aligned itself to the US, Ujamaa would have worked?
No, that's not what I said. I said that I think that Ujamaa may have not worked because of the context of the Cold War. Not that it had aligned itself to that's a bit of a interesting question, because how could it align itself to the US when Ujamaa is fundamentally not capitalism and the US was capitalist? So it's not really about that. I think it's just about the context that it all happened in. I think that what I'm saying is that if it was not during the Cold War era, maybe it would have worked. Maybe Ujamaa would have worked.
They create the Cold War because of Ujamaa and the likes of Ujamaa. That's why they create the Cold War, right? So Ujamaa does not exist in the Cold War. The Cold War is created because of Ujamaa. Cold War is a response to African liberation. The pretense of, there's a Cold War is because the US is foreseeing their downfall. And therefore they create the Cold War. So...
Well,
what we need to understand is we must take African principles and African conceptions to rebuild. We must. But when we do, we need to understand that we will be attacked. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
We don't have, which is what happened in Tanzania, betrayers, local betrayers, and we have to deal with betrayers accordingly, because this is what they do. They pose a danger to all, because those betrayers is why Ujamaa failed.
Yeah, they betrayed
Those
Magufuli as
betrayers,
well.
right? Those betrayers is why Lumumba was killed. Those betrayers is why Thomas Sankara was killed. So we as a people must learn from our
Magufuli as well.
mistakes. When you're sure that people are truly betrayers, like we are sure in these cases that I just mentioned, they need to be dealt with accordingly. So it's not a context of Cold War, and if maybe they weren't doing Ujamaa during Cold War. Cold War was created because they were doing Ujamaa. And I'm not saying specifically Ujamaa. I'm saying because Africa was seeking to liberate themselves, and they were using Russia as a better partner, because Russia had not done the ills that the US, the British, the French had done on them, which is what Traore is kind of doing now. Because they were doing that, and this Russia is seen as a great enemy of the West, they suffered the consequences, right? But also, not just that, they had betrayers who allowed for that to happen. So if they didn't have betrayers, is where we need to look at this as Africans. From an African perspective, if they didn't have betrayers, maybe it would have survived, because we know for sure we're going to be retaliated on. That we should not be naive about that. But if our country, like China was, if our country has discipline, and for those who have discipline, they meet the consequences that are appropriate, which China did, then we do not have face the risk of having betrayers bring down a thing that is supposed to help everyone, like Ujamaa. So to me, that's where we need to start looking. What systems within us are weak points that the imperialisms always use to take down what we're trying to build?
Okay, let's round this up. I've got a question for you, Amne.
Yes.
If you could redesign the international investment framework from scratch, no legacy institutions, no historical debt, no power imbalances, what would non-extractive deal making look like for you?
That's a good question. Well, I think, to be honest, I actually think that the problem with the international frameworks as they exist, the international frameworks are the multilateral frameworks that exist are fine if everybody works, if everybody is at the same level in terms of development. It doesn't work when there's such a huge disparity, like when you look at a lot of the, least developed countries, versus the others. The whole system of trading with one another, opening markets for one another, I think there is nothing wrong with that. I think that this is fine. But I think that it can only work and it can be balanced if you're talking about countries that are on the same development level. And I think that's the issue with Africa. So I think that if things could be done differently, I think Africa should have, a lot of these African nations should have waited and adopted a lot of protectionism, industrialization internally within their countries before, and reached a certain level where they even have industries, right? To then go into these international global markets and the international investment structures. Because the way they did it, which is just to enter at independence when there was absolutely nothing, I mean, that was just shooting themselves in the leg, because they can't catch up. They don't have any industries, they don't have anything to compete with. So they just they just end up being a market for raw materials, and that's it. So I think that's what I would do if everything would start all over again. African nations should wait 30 years, 40 years before joining the international global systems, just like China did, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, just like China did. Yeah, absolutely.
But we
Okay,
don't
you got any more questions for Amne?
we don't even have to join them, right? We really actually don't. We are the ones with the muscle. We need to start flexing our muscle.
Yeah, I do agree. I do agree with that, and I think that that's the whole spirit of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. It is about that. It's about trading with one another. It's about investing with one another. It's about it's
No,
about
it's not.
relying on our single market. But
No,
I
it's
think
not.
that
Yeah, no, it's not. The African Free Trade Agreement is about the US and the Western hegemony, all of them getting access to Africa through a sneaky route. It's not about Africa and us coming together. No, it's not. It isn't.
really, I don't agree with that. On what basis are you saying that?
On the fact that since it has existed, Africa has not improved and it actually has gotten worse. And those who have improved are the international companies and the foreign governments.
Yeah, but the international companies, first of all, the framework in itself has just started, the agreement, sorry, the continental area, sorry, has just started functioning, I think 2 years ago. So countries have now started
the free trade agreement has been in existence, I think, for more than 10 years now. But I'll give two examples, two concrete examples. One of them is the fabric industry in Kenya and the East African area, and mtumba, what is otherwise known as secondhand clothing. So at one point, Kenya, I believe Rwanda, I'm not sure if Tanzania was there, I think Uganda was, they wanted to get rid of secondhand clothing. And so they pushed for it and they said they want to bring back their textile industry, their fabric textile industry. And the West said, according to the African Free Trade Agreement, you cannot do that. And if you do that, we're going to sanction you. And they were forced to stop doing that. So it didn't even start. And they used the African Free, go look it up. They used the African Free Trade Agreement to do that to them. The second example is me trying to start a clothing business with a tailor at home and tailors at home bringing clothes here that are more reasonably priced, because every time you want to try and get African clothes here, it's $100 plus. And everyone thinks that that's a good thing because you all are so full of bougie mindset. You don't even understand that that's exploitation, right? So I wanted to bring African clothes here that actually were reasonably priced, that you can buy an African dress for $40, 30 something, and it's still sewn well. And you don't have to, because you're not making the salary to buy $100 clothing, right? So that it can fit your income, our people's income. So I wanted to do that. And I am someone who wants to support African businesses. So I wanted a shipping company from Kenya that is owned by a Kenyan. And we started negotiating and they gave me a quote. And it was so high, we could not afford it. And so I went to DHL to get a quote and it was significantly low. Why was the DHS offer significantly low? Why do you think, Amne?
Economies of scale.
What does economies of scale mean?
It's a massive company that just doesn't have the same costs as companies that don't have a footprint all over the world.
But what else are they getting? What else are they getting in Kenya that the Kenyan company is not facing? What else does DHL get in Kenya that the Kenyan company is not facing or is not getting?
You can tell me.
They don't have to pay as much taxes, if any. I don't even think they pay taxes, right? They don't have the same.
This is not true. No. This is not true at all.
DHL pays taxes in Kenya? No, I'm asking.
No. This is not true.
Hold on. If it's not
true at all. I know that there is so much.
Hold on, Oladile. Hold on. No,
it's not true.
Okay, it's not true, Amni. It's not true. So I'm gonna ask
and
you.
Also, sorry.
No. Wait.
I'd just like to correct you on something. The whole basis of the second-hand clothes had nothing to do with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, but it had everything to do with the GATT agreement under the World Trade Organization. It has nothing to do with the free trade agreement.
Hold on 1 minute. Let's deal with this one thing that I said that is not true according to you. Does DHL pay taxes in Kenya?
Yes, the DHL pays taxes wherever they're in.
DHL pays taxes in Kenya.
I don't know about DHL paying taxes, how much taxes they pay in Kenya, but yes, these companies, they pay taxes wherever, in whichever country they're in. Now,
how can you say in one breath, I don't know how much DHL pays or if they do, but these companies pay taxes wherever they are in?
Yes, because I work with a lot of these multinational companies, and
So
I
you've
know that they
seen
pay
actually that they
taxes.
pay taxes, or you've been told they pay taxes?
They pay taxes.
All right. So it is my duty to you and to our audience to put out, and I'm going to put it on Substack, the evidence that DHL does not pay taxes in Kenya.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Go on, Oladile.
They don't pay any taxes whatsoever in Kenya.
No, we just questioned it because you know how multinational companies work, because they always have a way to not pay taxes. You know, they always have
I
a way.
don't think it's a question of not paying taxes. I think it's maybe a question of paying reduced taxes. But that's not something that is only multinational. Tanzanian, Ghanaian, any business does that. It's not a question of a Western company versus an African company. It's just business.
Okay. Nduka, you got any question? I got final question for you. Nduka, you got any question? Okay, final question for me is: what is the one deal you've seen or helped structure that gives you genuine hope that another way is possible?
Sorry, what deal have I seen on which?
What is the one deal you've seen or helped structure that gives you a genuine hope that another way is possible?
What's a deal that I've seen on a structure? I didn't hear on a what?
That the deal that you've seen or helped structure.
Oh,
that
okay.
gives you genuine hope that there's another way around.
Oh yeah, I think that the negotiations that I do in Tanzania the last few years gives me enormous hope in terms of things, because they're when it comes to their natural resources, they are really in control as much as they can be. Remember, this is also another thing, right? It's that one of the things that Nyerere had said was he actually refused that there would be any mining that would take place, because he said that as long as we don't have the capacity to take these resources out of the ground, we should not open. We shouldn't just not do mining.
That's a sensible man.
It is a very sensible principle, especially since a lot of African countries don't only have natural resources, they have other things that they can monetize and make money off. Like, for example, I think in Tanzania, if Tanzania just decided to really hone down on tourism, for example, I mean, I think that it could be a much bigger contributor to.
Amne, as you're talking, your focus is basically European market. Why are we not focusing on building the African market? Because seriously, as big as Africa is, we don't even need to market to them. Okay, why are we not focusing on actually building the African capacity? Why don't we 1.4 billion people? Why are we not building within?
But I don't know how you came to that conclusion that it's a European focus, just because I said that they can focus on tourism and it can be a big earner for the GDP. But my point here was just to say that when Tanzania decided, like, okay, we're going to start mining and all that, the reality is that a lot of African countries don't have the capacities that other countries have in terms of technology, especially the technology, because mining is about technology, but what I am seeing is that the government has put in place a plan to actually get that technology in place. And this takes time. So a lot of the negotiations that you see is actually around the preoccupation of how do we build the capacity and how do we get the technology that we need, so that eventually, we can run the show 100% without any foreign companies. And that gives me a lot of hope, because I see I really do see the change when it comes to natural resources in Tanzania and the negotiations that are taking place. And a lot of African countries, by the way, are following suit. They're following suit on that. By the way, just something that maybe you can know about, but the person who is now running in Mali, the individual the individual that is actually advising the president on the mining code and its natural resources, was someone who was working for Barrick Gold. Okay, but an important factor here before that is that this person also spent a lot of time in Tanzania, and a lot of the codes that we're seeing, the laws in the Sahel countries that you're seeing when it comes to natural resources, a lot of them are coming from Tanzania. So Tanzania really is the example and the benchmark when it comes to that. And that gives me a lot of hope.
Okay, yeah. At least, thank you very much for your time, actually. Yeah, we appreciate you coming on. At least you give us a perspective, because I've always looked at, okay, somebody's, I'm always looking for somebody, because I'm always looking to speak to people who are doing the work and what they're doing and how we can basically build our own capacity. So we appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
And we're looking forward to do it again. So just putting it out there.
We can do it with no shade, but we can do it when I'm in Switzerland and the internet is more stable.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, no worries.
So what is our conclusion, Oladile? Can we negotiate for equity?
What's the conclusion for me is I don't think we can negotiate for equity. That's my conclusion anyway. In as much as Amne is saying, okay, the things are happening, the things are doing, and we need to just start doing certain things. But personally, I think we need to be a lot more revolutionary, like the Ibrahim Traore way. Because Urugu are basically, at the end of the day, they're not people to deal with, because they've told us so many times that we can't deal with them. So that's my conclusion.
All right.
Yeah. Well, my conclusion is definitely yes, we can, and we are doing it. By the way, it's just taking the time that it's taking. But I think that maybe not, probably not in my lifetime, possibly in my kids' lifetime or my grandkids' lifetime. But I know that the change is going to be there, and I think the work. Not that I know that the work is starting because I see it.
Yeah, we know the work is being done anyway. That thing for me, it gives me pleasure that the work is being done, because we can see the mindset is changing, and that's the key. The mindset change. As long as the mindset is changing, the work will be done. So thank you very much for your time anyway.
Thank you so much. I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Guys, finally, if you don't mind, if you enjoy this podcast and you follow our work, please subscribe to our channels. Please subscribe. The Emerging Alkebulan, Kumbukeni. We're on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Substack. I put a lot of posts on Substack lately. Go read Oladile's thoughts, man, because it's very, very thought-provoking. I bring it home. So, guys, thank you very much, and we'll see you probably on Sunday. Not confirmed yet, but we might be back on Sunday. So I'll see you soon.
Just quickly, Oladile, look out for Kumbukeni. We have a broadcast coming up August 16th. Yeah. You do not want to miss this one, August 16th. So yes.
August 16th. Look forward to that. It will be broadcasted on both channels. So yeah, please. See you all soon. Thank you very much.